At 0214 hours, 480 kilometers south of Iceland, a sound broke the silence of the North Atlantic that U.S. Navy sonar operators recognized immediately. An active sonar pulse, the acoustic equivalent of a searchlight switching on in a dark room. A Russian Kilo-class submarine had just illuminated its torpedo targeting system and directed it at a U.S. Navy surface combatant. The Russian captain believed the move would force a choice: stand down or risk an engagement neither side could contain. He did not know that the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, USS Oscar Austin, had been tracking his vessel for hours before that pulse was ever transmitted, and that within 90 seconds of his most aggressive move, every weapon system on that destroyer had already computed a firing solution. Moscow had committed a billion-dollar submarine to a bluff. Washington was holding a hand it had no intention of folding. The confrontation did not begin in the North Atlantic. It began weeks earlier in the Caribbean, where a vessel designated the Marinara was attempting to move Iranian oil through international waters using layered legal obfuscation. The U.S. Department of State had flagged this ship well in advance. AIS transponder dark, registration falsified, beneficial ownership obscured through a chain of shell entities that dissolved under scrutiny. The cargo, sanctioned crude, the revenue from which flows into supply chains that fund regional instability. For the men and women of the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard, this was not a single-ship problem. The global trading system moves approximately $3.4 trillion in goods through the world's sea lanes annually. That system functions because there is a set of enforceable rules governing it. When those rules are tested in one theater, the answer given there becomes precedent everywhere. Russia's response to the interdiction effort revealed the degree of pressure its economy is operating under. The Kremlin's shadow fleet, by some estimates exceeding 1,000 aging tankers, many operating without adequate insurance or classification society oversight, is the primary mechanism by which Russia continues to monetize oil exports despite the sanctions architecture imposed after 2022. Every barrel that reaches a buyer is revenue that sustains the operational tempo Moscow requires. The fleet is not a strategic luxury, it is a financial lifeline. When U.S. Coast Guard vessels established pursuit of the Marinara in international waters, the Russian response was to retroactively register the vessel as a Russian sovereign asset, a legal maneuver executed mid-chase designed to inject ambiguity into the rules of engagement calculus. If the Marinara was now a Russian-flagged ship, boarding or seizing it carried implications that a stateless vessel did not. Moscow's strategists calculated that this ambiguity would be enough to cause the American commanders to hesitate. They sent a Kilo-class submarine and surface escorts to reinforce that calculation. The message was intended to be visceral: approach this vessel and risk a confrontation with nuclear-armed Russian military assets operating in open ocean. What Moscow's planners did not fully account for was the sensor architecture surrounding the Oscar Austin. The Arleigh Burke class is not simply a surface combatant. It is a networked information node, a platform whose capability is substantially multiplied by its connection to every other asset in the operational theater. The Oscar Austin's AN/S PY-1D phased array radar provides 360-degree coverage of the air picture without rotating components, scanning continuously, updating tracks faster than any human operator can process unaided. The Aegis Combat Management System fuses that radar picture with undersea warfare data, electronic intelligence, and data-linked feeds from aircraft and other ships into a single integrated display. Her undersea warfare suite, the AN/SQQ-89 V-15, combines hull-mounted sonar arrays with the processing capability to classify contacts by acoustic signature against a library of known vessels that the U.S. Navy has been building for decades. The Kilo class has a specific acoustic fingerprint, the tonals generated by its propulsion machinery, the harmonic signatures of its pumps, the characteristic sound of its propeller at various RPM settings. These signatures have been cataloged, updated, and archived through years of close-range collection operations. The Oscar Austin sonar operators did not need to guess what they were tracking. They knew. Overhead, a P-8A Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft had laid a barrier of 32 AN/SSQ-53 DFA sonobuoys in a pattern that enclosed the submarine's operating area. Each buoy is a passive acoustic sensor transmitting to the P-8A in real time. The aircraft's AN/APY-10 multimode radar supplemented the acoustic picture with radar detection of the submarine's snorkel mast during its periodic surfacing to recharge batteries, a vulnerability inherent to diesel-electric propulsion that no amount of crew skill can entirely eliminate. The digital net the P-8A established meant that the Kilo had no route out of the operational area that did not pass through a sensor. The submarine's captain was operating on the assumption that the ocean is opaque. For his adversary, it was not. At 0345 hours, the Russian submarine made its move. Ballast tanks blowing. A 4,000-ton Kilo-class submarine ascending through the water column at a rate that registered immediately on the Oscar Austin's sonar. The ascent was rapid, deliberately so. The visible surfacing of a submarine in close proximity to a surface vessel is a pressure tactic, a demonstration of physical proximity designed to force a course change or a response that could be characterized as escalatory. The Russian captain expected the American destroyer to maneuver away. He expected the Coast Guard vessels to break off. He was betting that presence equals deterrence. The Oscar Austin held course at 18 knots. As the Kilo sail broke the surface less than 500 yards from the Marinara's hull, it came up into a tactical environment that had been precisely arranged before it arrived. The Oscar Austin's Mark 45 5-inch naval gun was already slewed and tracking. Two phalanx close-in weapon systems had acquired the surface submarine as a contact. The RUM 139 vertical launch ASROC system, capable of delivering a Mark 54 torpedo to a submarine's position within 90 seconds from miles away, was ready. The Oscar Austin did not fire. The choice not to fire was as deliberate and as loaded with meaning as any weapons release could have been. Every Russian officer who saw the imagery later understood what the American commander had declined to do. Inside the Combat Information Center, the watch team was operating at a tempo that looked, from the outside, like calm. It was not the absence of urgency, it was the product of training cycles measured in years. Scenarios run until the correct sequence of decisions becomes automatic, until the human response time compresses to match the speed of the threat. The Russian radio traffic demanding cessation of what Moscow characterized as an illegal pursuit was logged, translated, and passed up the chain. The American commander held course. When the USS Donald Cook appeared on the Russian surface group's radar at the eastern edge of their display, the geometry of the situation became arithmetically clear to the Russian escort commanders. Two Arleigh Burke destroyers, a P-8A overhead with active sonobuoy coverage, Coast Guard vessels in direct pursuit of the target vessel, and a submarine that had just sacrificed its primary tactical advantage, stealth, by surfacing under direct observation. The numerical equation had shifted, the Kilo submerged, the surface escorts reduced their aggressive maneuvering. The Marinara continued on its track, now trailed by vessels whose sonar arrays maintained continuous contact with the submarine below. Every course change the Russian captain made was logged. Every depth excursion was recorded. Every communication his vessel transmitted was captured by the Oscar Austin's electronic warfare suite and relayed to processing facilities in Norfolk and beyond. The deception campaign Russia's state broadcaster was running in parallel. Edited footage characterizing the American pursuit as unprovoked aggression against a civilian vessel collapsed against the technical record. The Marinara's AIS history showed months of deliberate transponder suppression. Its registration trail dissolved into entities with no verifiable ownership. The cargo manifest did not match the loading records from its last port call. The Oscar Austin had been recording all of this. The documentation went to the U.S. Department of State before Moscow's media operation had finished its first broadcast cycle. The financial cost of the Russian escort mission is accessible. Two surface combatants and a Kilo-class submarine committed for an extended operation in the North Atlantic burns through fuel reserves, maintenance hours, and crew rotation budgets that the Russian Northern Fleet is not generating revenue to easily replace. The dollar figure runs into the millions. More significant is the intelligence yield surrendered. Every active sonar pulse the Kilo transmitted was characterized and archived. The acoustic signature data gathered during extended close-range tracking will refine the classification library for this class of vessel. The electronic emissions from the Russian surface combatants, radar frequencies, communications waveforms, electronic warfare system parameters, were vacuumed up by sensors that were designed for exactly this purpose. Moscow attempted to demonstrate capability and demonstrated vulnerability instead. British Merlin helicopters and French frigates were operating within the wider sensor net surrounding the incident area. This is the specific capability the Kremlin's strategic calculus consistently underweights. Not the power of a single American platform, but the shared data architecture of an alliance whose member nations exchange sensor feeds, tactical pictures, and classification databases in near real time. The Russian submarine was not tracked by the Oscar Austin alone. It was tracked by a consortium of Allied systems whose collective coverage had no gaps. The Marinara continued toward its destination, now the most thoroughly monitored tanker in the North Atlantic. NATO tracking of the vessel did not pause after the submarine submerged. Its route, its communications, its cargo, and its port contacts are a running file that grows with each nautical mile. The two tankers already seized, the Skipper and the Centuries, established the precedent that the interdiction effort is not rhetorical. It produces outcomes. Russia's attempt to use military escalation as a substitute for legal legitimacy produced the opposite of its intended effect. Additional U.S. assets moved toward the region rather than away from it. F-35 deployments to northern European bases expanded the air umbrella over the same waters the Shadow Fleet transits. The Kremlin's escalation ladder was met with a response that moved methodically up the ladder behind it. The Russian submarine captain filed his after-action report. Whatever language he chose, the tactical record is unambiguous. A Kilo-class vessel conducting a high-priority escort mission was detected before it took any aggressive action, tracked continuously through multiple acoustic and sensor systems, outmaneuvered at every decision point, and photographed on the surface by the ships it was tasked to intimidate. It then submerged under conditions where its position was known to its adversary at all times and returned to base. The Oscar Austin turned back to its patrol station. Its crew logged the contact, secured the systems, and prepared for the next potential engagement. For them, operationally, it was a mission that proceeded as trained. For Moscow's naval planners, it was a comprehensive technical assessment of exactly which of their tactical assumptions about undersea operations in the North Atlantic are no longer valid. The Shadow Fleet will continue operating. The economic pressure driving it has not changed, but the cost structure of protecting it with military assets has now been demonstrated in a scenario where every Russian investment produced negative intelligence return. Each sonar ping, each radar sweep, each radio transmission fed data to systems that were built for collection. Moscow paid full operational price for the mission and handed the opposing intelligence services a detailed technical profile in exchange. The sea lanes remain open. International law remains the governing framework. The USS Oscar Austin, the USS Donald Cook, the P-8A Poseidon, and the Allied assets that built the net around this engagement are back on patrol. The Kilo-class submarine that surfaced into a 5-inch naval guns tracking solution and chose correctly not to find out what came next is back at its berth, with a crew that now understands something about the North Atlantic that their training briefs underrepresented. Modern naval power is not measured in the number of platforms committed to an operation. It is measured in the density and integration of the sensor architecture those platforms anchor, and in the gap between what one side can see and what the other side believes remains hidden. On this day, in 480 kilometers of North Atlantic water, that gap was absolute. What do you think was the decisive factor in this confrontation? The P-8A's sonobuoy barrier that made the ocean transparent, or the Oscar Austin's decision to hold course at 18 knots when the submarine surfaced 500 yards away? Tell us in the comments. And if you want more breakdowns of Shadow Fleet operations and the naval systems deployed against them, subscribe and turn on notifications.